They said some marriages looked like advertisements, smooth, polished, smiling at the camera, even when nobody was watching. Darius and Elena's marriage was one of those. The kind people pointed at during conversations and sighed, using it as evidence that love could survive ambition, long hours, and the constant buzzing of phones. Darius wore confidence like an expensive watch, flashing it effortlessly in public, while Elena wore calm the way queens wore crowns, quietly, without explanation. Together, they appeared balanced, untouchable, the couple that made others question their own homes on long drives back from dinner parties. Behind the scenes, however, admiration required maintenance. Elena had mastered the invisible art of support, knowing when to speak, when to stay silent, when to step forward, and when to disappear just enough for Darius to shine. She remembered names he forgot, corrected errors before they reached daylight, and softened sharp moments with humor that never embarrassed him. She laughed at his jokes even when she had heard them twice already, and when people praised his success, she smiled like someone proud of a garden she watered daily, but never signed her name under. Darius, for his part, enjoyed the applause a little too much. He liked the way people looked at him when he walked into a room, the way success seemed to announce him before his mouth ever opened. Somewhere along the line, admiration stopped being enough. It became fuel. He began to believe the marriage worked because he worked, that Elena's steadiness was automatic, like electricity, always there, rarely appreciated, only noticed when it went out. And like many people who mistake stability for weakness, Darius never considered what would happen the day the current decided to move elsewhere. Darius liked control the way some people liked coffee, strong, constant, and necessary to function. He controlled meetings with charm, controlled conversations with confidence, and controlled outcomes by speaking first and loudest. To him, life was a negotiation he was always winning, and marriage was simply another agreement where he believed he held the better cards. He often told himself he was a good husband because he provided, because his name opened doors, because his success paid bills loudly enough to drown out quieter needs like emotional presence and mutual respect. In his mind, power came with benefits, and benefits were meant to be enjoyed. He didn't see his desires as betrayals, but as rewards for endurance. Long hours, hard decisions, stress. Surely a man like him deserved flexibility. The word entitlement never crossed his thoughts. He preferred evolution. He believed relationships, like businesses, needed restructuring when they stopped serving growth. Elena, calm and accommodating, seemed like someone who would eventually understand that logic, especially if it was presented confidently enough. What Darius failed to notice was how control slowly replaced affection. He stopped asking questions and started making announcements. He stopped listening and started assuming. He believed silence meant agreement, not patience. Even humor became a tool. Light jokes masking sharp decisions, laughter cushioning disrespect. When Elena adjusted instead of resisting, Darius interpreted it as proof that he was right. And like a man speeding on an empty road, he mistook the absence of obstacles for permission to go faster, never imagining there might be a wall ahead that didn't care how confident he felt behind the wheel. Kemi entered Darius's life quietly, like a door left slightly open that eventually invited a breeze strong enough to rearrange furniture. She admired him openly, laughed loudly at his stories, and treated his confidence like a miracle instead of a habit. With her, Darius felt refreshed, unchallenged, unquestioned. He told himself it wasn't serious, just relief from routine, a harmless expansion of happiness that didn't subtract from what he already had at home. He became skilled at separation. Different phones, different tones of voice, different versions of himself. At home, he was the composed husband. Elsewhere, he was the admired man who felt young again. He justified the imbalance with precision, convincing himself that honesty would only complicate things unnecessarily. After all, Elena was stable, predictable, dependable. Kemi was excitement, novelty, applause. In his mind, wanting both didn't make him dishonest, it made him efficient. What Darius didn't realize was how arrogance sharpens blindness. He believed secrecy was mastery, that no one noticed his absences or his rehearsed explanations. He didn't see how Elena's questions became fewer not because she knew nothing, but because she was observing. He mistook calm for ignorance and loyalty for permanence. And while he carefully balanced his double life like a professional juggler, he never once asked himself what would happen if one day Elena stopped clapping and started watching the performance with new eyes. The idea came to Darius fully formed, which made him trust it immediately. Their anniversary, public, symbolic, emotional, was the perfect stage. He decided the dinner wouldn't be about celebrating the past, but redefining the future. No arguments at home, no private confrontations. This would be presented cleanly, confidently, and publicly, where emotions behave themselves. He told himself Elena would understand eventually, especially once she saw how calmly he framed it. He booked the restaurant, chose the table, and even rehearsed the timing. He imagined himself arriving late, making an entrance, controlling the narrative from the first word spoken. He convinced himself that public spaces softened resistance, that dignity would keep Elena quiet long enough for logic to win. He even drafted rules, structured, organized, generous, in his opinion. In his mind, preparation equaled fairness. There was a strange humor in how seriously Darius took his plan, like a man preparing a presentation that only he believed was necessary. He felt proud of his foresight, blind to the cruelty of the setting. He didn't consider that anniversaries carried emotional weight heavier than logic, or that dignity could coexist with decisive action. All he saw was a well-designed moment where he would assert control, adjust the terms, and walk away believing he had solved a problem instead of creating a turning point. Elena dressed carefully that evening, choosing elegance without effort, the kind that didn't beg for attention. She believed in showing up fully for moments that mattered, even when routine threatened to dull them. When Darius told her to go ahead to the restaurant because he had something quick to settle, she didn't argue. It wasn't unusual. Separate departures had slowly become normal, explained away by ambition and schedules that rarely aligned. Darius stayed behind, not rushed, not conflicted, focused. He reviewed his words, adjusted his tone, and reassured Kemi that everything was under control. He believed timing was power, and arriving late would place Elena in a position of emotional vulnerability. In his mind, he wasn't avoiding her. He was setting the stage. Confidence filled him the way applause does before it actually begins. As Elena stepped into the night alone, she carried expectation, not suspicion. She believed anniversaries still meant something, that love, even when strained, remembered its roots. Darius, meanwhile, mistook her trust for predictability. Neither of them knew the evening would mark the last time their marriage moved in the same direction. One was walking forward with hope. The other was arriving late with certainty. And history has never been kind to those who confuse certainty with wisdom. The restaurant glowed with quiet celebration, the kind that hummed softly rather than shouted. Candles flickered like they knew secrets, and soft music curled through the air with practiced elegance. Elena arrived early, as she always did, believing punctuality was a form of respect, not just for others, but for moments themselves. The waiter recognized her instantly, smiling with the familiarity reserved for women who carried themselves like regulars even when they rarely appeared. "Happy anniversary," he said warmly, and Elena smiled back, unaware of how fragile that phrase would soon become. She sat alone, hands folded neatly, watching couples arrive together, laughing, whispering, sharing coats and private jokes. There was no bitterness in her observation, only reflection. 10 years was not a small thing. 10 years was learning someone's silences, predicting their moods, forgiving them before they apologized. She thought of the early days when Darius used to rush home just to tell her things, when ambition felt shared instead of competitive. She wondered briefly when that softness had been replaced by schedules and assurances that tomorrow would be better. Elena checked her phone once, then placed it face down. Waiting didn't bother her. She had waited through longer things, long nights, long seasons, long stretches of being the steady one. She adjusted her posture, sipped water, and reminded herself that anniversaries were pauses, not performances. She didn't know this pause was already stretching into a quiet farewell. Outside, traffic moved on, unaware that at one table, Hope sat patiently, unaware it was about to be publicly tested. When the restaurant doors opened again, the shift was immediate. Conversation softened, eyes lifted, and curiosity rippled across the room like a subtle wave. Darius walked in confidently, not alone. His arm was linked with Kemi's, her presence unmistakable, youthful, deliberate, and entirely out of place. He moved with the assurance of a man who believed he was walking into control, not chaos. To him, this was timing perfected. Elena stood slowly, confusion flickering across her face like a shadow passing over light. For a moment, she wondered if this was some elaborate misunderstanding, some joke that missed its cue. Darius smiled, the same smile he used in boardrooms, polished, rehearsed, devoid of hesitation. "Sorry I'm late," he said lightly, as if lateness was the worst offense in the room. Then he gestured casually. "This is Kemi." The word this hung in the air, heavy and undefined. Chairs creaked, glasses paused midair. Elena's mind raced, searching for logic where none existed. Darius pulled out a chair for Kemi, the gesture intimate, practiced. In that moment, Elena understood something had shifted permanently. The room felt smaller, louder, sharper. Darius, oblivious to the tension slicing through the space, believed he had successfully commanded attention. He did not yet realize that attention, once captured, does not always behave the way you expect. Darius wasted no time. He spoke calmly, confidently, as though presenting a proposal at work. He explained his philosophy, his evolution, his belief that honesty required expansion, not limitation. He spoke of open marriages as modern solutions, of emotional maturity as acceptance. He slid a neatly printed document across the table, rules, boundaries, expectations. In his mind, preparation equaled respect. Kemi leaned back, watching Elena closely, lips curved in a faint smile that mistook endurance for weakness. The irony was sharp enough to cut glass. Elena listened without interruption, her face composed, her silence unsettling. She noticed how Darius avoided her eyes while speaking, how his voice softened only when he reassured himself aloud. The room felt suspended between disbelief and disbelief's quieter cousin, clarity. When Darius finished, he waited, confident. Silence stretched. Elena looked at the paper, then at him, then at the woman sitting too comfortably in her space. She stood gently, smoothing her dress, her voice steady. "Enjoy your meal," she said simply. No tears, no raised voice, just dignity, walking away on calm feet. Darius exhaled, relieved, mistaking grace for surrender. He had no idea that silence, when chosen deliberately, often signals not defeat, but direction. Darius watched Elena leave and felt victorious. To him, the absence of drama confirmed his brilliance. He leaned back, smiling faintly, already rewriting the evening in his head as a successful negotiation. Kemi studied him closely, uncertain whether to celebrate or worry. "That went better than I expected," she said carefully. Darius nodded, pride swelling. "I knew she'd understand," he replied, mistaking restraint for compliance. What he didn't see was Elena outside, standing still for a moment, breathing deeply, not from pain, but from resolve. The humiliation had passed through her like cold water, shocking but clarifying. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. She simply observed the truth with startling clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was intention. And intention required response, not reaction. Back inside, Darius laughed, ordered wine, and spoke of the future as though it were already secured. He didn't notice how the restaurant's warmth had cooled around him, how eyes no longer admired but assessed. He believed the worst was over, unaware that consequences rarely announce themselves loudly. They arrive quietly, wearing patience, waiting for arrogance to finish speaking. Days later, Elena revisited memories with a new lens. She saw herself clearly, the editor of late-night emails, the silent strategist behind introductions that advanced Darius's career. She remembered hosting dinners, smoothing conflicts, protecting his image when it faltered. She had been present without being visible, influential, without demanding credit. At work events, executives had noticed her long before Darius realized it. One of them was Mr. Calder, the CEO, observant, composed, respectful. He had always greeted Elena with genuine interest, asked thoughtful questions, remembered her insights. She now recognized that respect had been extended quietly, consistently, without performance. Elena understood then that dignity multiplies when placed in the right environment. The anniversary had not ended her marriage. It had revealed its truth. And truth, once seen clearly, does not need drama to act. It only needs courage, timing, and the wisdom to choose differently. Mr. Calder was not the kind of CEO who needed noise to prove importance. His presence was quiet but heavy, like a door that shut softly and still made everyone sit straighter. While others at corporate events chased Darius's laughter and shiny confidence, Calder's attention often drifted elsewhere, to the person standing just slightly behind the spotlight, the one who spoke less but made more sense when she did. That person was Elena. He had noticed her years ago, not because she was someone's wife, but because she carried intelligence like it was normal to be intelligent, and class like it didn't require announcing. Elena remembered him clearly now. The first time was at a charity-free, ordinary corporate dinner, nothing theatrical, just a calm gathering of executives in a private room. Darius had been busy performing, telling stories that grew larger with every sip of drink, while Elena quietly corrected a mistaken detail about a client's contract timeline. Calder had looked at her then, not with surprise, but with the calm approval of someone who values competence more than charm. "That's correct," he had said, then turned to her directly. "You have a sharp mind." Darius laughed it off like a compliment meant for him too, but Elena had felt something rare in that moment. Being seen without being used. In the days after the anniversary disaster, Elena didn't run to Calder like a movie heroine chasing a dramatic rescue. She wasn't looking for saviors. She was looking for sanity. Still, her mind returned to that calm CEO, his steady respect, his clean boundaries, his eyes that didn't undress a woman with entitlement. She wondered with a bitter little smile how Darius, who always bragged about being smart with people, had managed to overlook the fact that the most powerful man in his company had quietly admired the one person Darius treated like background furniture. Darius, meanwhile, interpreted Elena's silence the way foolish men interpret a quiet room, as proof nobody heard the insult. He went back to work with extra swagger, even lighter on his feet, like a man who believed he had successfully rearranged reality. In meetings, he talked more than usual, interrupting colleagues with jokes that weren't funny and confidence that wasn't earned. He told himself his home life was now handled, which was his favorite word whenever he didn't intend to handle anything responsibly. The open marriage demand had been delivered. The rest, he assumed, would fall into place like obedient paperwork. But something began to shift around him at work, subtle at first. Emails came with colder tones. People who used to laugh too hard at his jokes now smiled politely and returned to their laptops. A scheduled presentation slot was suddenly given to someone else. Darius blamed jealousy. He always blamed jealousy when life stopped applauding. He didn't notice he had grown careless, arriving late, skipping details, assuming his charm could cover cracks. Charm is not cement. It doesn't hold structures together. It only paints them while they're already crumbling. At home, Elena moved like a ghost with purpose. She wasn't cold, she was precise. She stopped asking where he'd been. She stopped reminding him about family events. She stopped offering emotional labor like free Wi-Fi. Darius, being Darius, mistook this as acceptance. "See," he told Kemi in a smug voice message. "She's adjusting." Kemi replied with emojis and praise, but even she began to notice his mood swings, how easily he snapped when questioned, how restless he became when Elena didn't react. It was almost comedic in a dark way. Darius wanted freedom, yet he panicked when Elena stopped behaving like a cage he could decorate. Elena did not wake up one morning suddenly fearless. Fear existed, yes, like a small, stubborn animal at the back of her mind. But she had lived with fear before. Fear of being misunderstood, Fear of losing stability, fear of raising children in a broken home, fear of starting over when society loves to blame women for men's choices. The difference now was that fear no longer controlled her decisions. It simply accompanied her, like a bag she carried without letting it determine her destination. She began to move carefully, not dramatically, because dramatic people announce their plans, and wise people finish them. She started by reclaiming her mind. She reviewed household finances quietly, not to steal or hide anything, but to understand what she had been holding together alone. She updated her resume, contacted old mentors, and booked a few professional consultations, not gossip sessions, but real career conversations. She attended an industry networking breakfast alone, dressed simply, speaking clearly, remembering that competence still mattered in a world that often pretended it didn't. She made a list of her accomplishments and almost laughed at herself halfway through, because how had she convinced herself she was just support when she had been the engine? Then she made a decision that felt both small and monumental. She stopped begging for peace in a house built on disrespect. She didn't threaten Darius. She didn't stage confrontations. She let him talk and talk and talk, like a radio that couldn't turn itself off, while she listened like a judge collecting evidence. Darius noticed her calm and found it irritating. He wanted tears, proof he mattered. Elena gave him none. Instead, she gave herself clarity. And clarity, once a woman holds it firmly, becomes something a man cannot negotiate with. Mr. Calder crossed paths with Elena again in a way that felt almost ordinary. No dramatic music, no champagne fountains, no scandalous hallway kisses. It happened at a professional forum hosted by a partner company. Elena attended on her own, seated near the front, taking notes like someone who intended to use information rather than merely hear it. Calder noticed her immediately, not because she was suddenly available, but because she looked like herself, composed, intelligent, unshaken by the need for attention. After the session, he approached with the kind of politeness that didn't demand anything. "Mrs. Darius Elena," he corrected himself gently. "It's good to see you." Your question during the panel was sharp. They spoke briefly. Nothing personal at first. Business, industry trends, strategy, topics Elena genuinely loved, but had often buried under domestic burdens. Calder listened carefully, not waiting for his turn to talk. That alone felt like relief. When Elena mentioned a market gap the company could address, Calder's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "That's the kind of thinking we need," he said. "Have you ever considered stepping into a larger role? Not as a favor, based on merit." Elena almost smiled at the phrasing. Men like Darius offered things as trophies. Calder offered opportunities as recognition. Later, Calder sent an email, professional, respectful, inviting Elena for a meeting about an upcoming strategic partnership initiative. No flirtation, no hints, no pressure. Elena read the message twice, then once more, surprised by how something so simple could feel so dignifying. Meanwhile, Darius was busy patting himself on the back, convinced Elena's silence meant she had accepted his new arrangement. The humor of it was sharp. While Darius believed he was expanding his options, Elena was quietly expanding her future into rooms where respect wasn't a reward but the baseline. Elena's meeting with Calder took place in a glass-walled office that felt like truth, transparent, clean, and impossible to hide behind. They spoke about projects, partnerships, organizational structure, and the company's need for leaders who could hold pressure without turning into noise. Calder presented a role, Director of Strategic Partnerships, not ceremonial, not decorative, but real power, real responsibility. Elena asked sharp questions. She did not smile too quickly. She did not behave grateful like a beggar. She negotiated like someone who understood her value, and Calder respected that. "I appreciate your clarity," he said, and Elena realized she hadn't heard that sentence in her home for a long time. After the meeting, Elena sat in her car for a while, hands on the steering wheel, breathing like someone who had been underwater and finally reached air. She wasn't euphoric. She was grounded. The next steps were not romantic, they were practical. She began preparing for separation with maturity, documents, timelines, conversations she would soon have. She thought of her children, their stability, their emotional health. She refused to become reckless just because she had been wounded. Darius's cruelty would not turn her into chaos. That evening, Darius came home talking too loudly, describing his day as if it were a trophy parade. He noticed Elena's quiet and tried to provoke her with casual arrogance. "You've been calm lately," he said, smirking. "I like it. Makes things easier." Elena looked at him then, not with anger, not with tears, but with the steady gaze of someone who finally saw him clearly. And for the first time, Darius felt a small discomfort crawl up his spine, because he sensed something he couldn't name. Elena wasn't adjusting. She was leaving, mentally first, strategically next. He wanted to ask what she was thinking, but pride swallowed the question. And that was the moment illusion stayed alive, only because Darius was too arrogant to check whether it still had a pulse. Boardrooms have a way of making truth feel official. The air is colder, the chairs are firmer, and even laughter sounds like it went through approval first. Darius arrived that morning with his usual swagger, tie perfect, cologne confident, smile loaded with assumptions. He walked in late, as he often did, expecting the familiar small inconveniences to bend around him. In his mind, lateness was a personality trait, not a disrespect. He nodded at colleagues like a king acknowledging subjects, thinking the world would always make room for him. Then he saw Elena, not in a hallway, not in the parking lot, not in a corner chair waiting like a loyal accessory. She was seated at the executive table, upright, composed, calm, with a nameplate in front of her like a quiet thunderclap. Darius's steps slowed as if the floor had turned to mud. His mouth opened slightly, then shut. For a split second, he looked around to confirm reality, as though someone might yell surprise and reveal it was a cruel prank. But nothing about Elena's face suggested performance. She did not smirk. She did not avoid his eyes. She looked steady, like a person who had already crossed a bridge he hadn't even noticed was there. Mr. Calder entered, and the room rose in practiced respect. When everyone sat, the CEO's voice cut through the air with calm authority. He announced strategic changes, new roles, new leadership direction, and then he did what Darius never imagined. He publicly praised Elena's work, her insight, her professionalism. The words were clean and specific, not vague compliments meant to decorate a woman. Then Calder announced her appointment as Director of Strategic Partnerships, a role that placed Elena directly in the line of power. Darius felt heat rush to his face, anger swelling like a storm trapped under skin. He wanted to speak, to interrupt, to laugh it off, anything. But boardrooms do not obey pride. They obey rank. And in that moment, Darius realized the terrible truth. His voice no longer carried weight in the room where he once performed. After the meeting, Darius moved like a man holding fire in his chest. He did not shake hands. He did not smile. He walked out fast, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched, eyes narrowed at anyone foolish enough to greet him. He reached the parking lot, got into his car, and slammed the door hard enough to make the windows tremble. Then he exploded, not elegantly, not wisely, but loudly, as if noise could reverse what had just happened. He punched the steering wheel, cursed under his breath, and stared ahead like the road itself had insulted him. Kemi was waiting in the passenger seat. She had insisted on coming, convinced she was watching the final defeat of a wife who would surely accept her place. The moment Darius sat down breathing like a furnace, she turned toward him with startled eyes. "What happened?" she asked, suddenly unsure of her own confidence. Darius ranted about betrayal, disrespect, humiliation, about Elena trying to destroy him. He spoke the way people speak when reality refuses to cooperate with their ego. His hands shook with fury, but his fury had nowhere to land. Then Kemi asked the question that sliced him open with quiet logic. "But didn't you want an open marriage? Didn't you say it was modern and mature? So why are you acting like she committed a crime?" Her voice was not mocking, just confused. Confusion is dangerous because it forces clarity. Darius tried to answer, but every explanation sounded foolish even to him. He couldn't say he wanted freedom for himself, but loyalty from Elena, without admitting hypocrisy. He couldn't threaten Mr. Calder without ruining his career. He couldn't confront Elena publicly without looking weak. All he could do was sit there boiling, realizing that the very rules he tried to impose had returned to him like a mirror, and mirrors do not negotiate. Kemi's excitement began to drain, replaced by something colder: calculation. She had been attracted to Darius's confidence, not his fragility. She liked the idea of being chosen, not the reality of being dragged into a storm. As Darius continued to rage, she studied him like a product that suddenly looked different outside the packaging. "So what can you do?" she asked carefully, as if speaking to a man holding a glass cup already cracked. Darius snapped, "I'll fix it," but even he didn't sound convinced. They drove in tense silence. Darius made calls, quick, aggressive calls, trying to regain control. He contacted colleagues who used to laugh at his jokes, but their responses were polite, distant, full of "I'm not sure," and "let's talk later." He texted Elena, but she didn't reply. He tried to call, but it went unanswered. His anger rose again, but now it was mixed with panic, the kind of panic that comes when a person realizes the world does not fear them anymore. Kemi watched the failures stack like unpaid bills. Her lips tightened. This wasn't the glamorous rebellion she imagined. This was a man losing grip. By evening, Kemi was already pulling back. She had always imagined herself stepping into a richer life, not sharing a sinking ship with a captain screaming at the waves. She questioned him again, more directly this time. "If your boss chose her, what does that mean about how he sees you?" Darius glared at her, but he couldn't answer. The truth was humiliating. Mr. Calder's decision wasn't just personal, it was professional judgment. Elena was being elevated because she was valuable. Darius was being exposed because he was replaceable. Kemi finally understood she had mistaken Darius's loudness for power. And loudness, when stripped of influence, is just noise that makes people leave the room. The following weeks were not dramatic fireworks. They were quieter, which made them crueler. Darius's promotion disappeared without ceremony, replaced by vague corporate language that sounded polite but meant rejection. Then came the internal audit, sudden, firm, thorough. The company began reviewing past incidents, complaints, and decisions that had once been brushed under the rug. The same charm that used to protect Darius now seemed to irritate people. His name, once spoken with admiration, was now followed by silence and careful facial expressions. Even the office receptionist began to say, "Good morning," like it cost her something. At home, Darius tried to regain dominance through anger. He paced, snapped, and threw accusations at the air. He complained about Elena as though she were a rebellious employee who refused to obey policy. But Elena no longer responded to his storms. She moved with calm focus, organizing, preparing, protecting the children emotionally, keeping conversations brief and respectful. Darius hated that most of all, not the separation, not the corporate downfall, but the fact that Elena refused to look broken. Nothing drives an arrogant person mad like seeing the person they tried to crush stand upright. Kemi, sensing the fall, began to disappear. First she stopped calling as often, then she stopped visiting, then she responded late with short messages. When Darius tried to confront her, she offered flimsy excuses. "I'm busy, my cousin is sick, I need space." Darius wanted to shout, but the shouting no longer worked. He realized with bitter clarity that the girlfriend who once smiled at his power had only been loyal to his advantage. Without money and status, he wasn't a prize, he was a problem. And in the quiet collapse of his life, Darius finally met the version of himself nobody had been brave enough to show him. A man who demanded loyalty but could not inspire it. The courtroom felt different from the boardroom, but the lesson was the same. Authority belonged to the one seated higher. Darius sat stiffly, dressed well, attempting to look like a man still in control. But his eyes betrayed him, restless, angry, searching for a weakness in the room he could attack. Elena entered calmly, not overdressed, not trying to prove anything. She greeted the judge respectfully, sat quietly, and waited. She looked like a woman who had already made peace with her decision, and Darius hated that peace like a thief hates a locked door. When the proceedings began, Darius tried to turn everything into a performance. He accused Elena of betrayal, of disrespect, of humiliating him. His voice rose, spilling emotion, like a cup tipped too fast. The judge listened, then calmly asked one question that drained the drama from the room. "Did you request an open marriage?" Darius hesitated. Hesitation is confession in a room that runs on truth. He tried to explain, to frame himself as a visionary misunderstood by a stubborn wife. But the logic turned on him like a well-trained dog. The judge's tone remained neutral, almost bored, because judges have seen pride pretend to be pain many times. Outside the courthouse, the air felt ordinary, which made the ending sharper. Elena walked with steady steps, children safe beside her, her future no longer tied to a man who viewed marriage as a stage for dominance. Darius stood behind, furious, empty, unable to chase, unable to fix, unable to rewrite. He had demanded freedom and received it, just not the way he imagined. And the cruelest humor of life showed itself plainly. The same mouth that once announced new rules could now only form one powerless sentence in his head. How did I lose everything so fast? Because arrogance never believes consequences are real until they arrive with paperwork. Please like and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.